Salutations, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you enjoyed having Thursday and Friday off this week. I was busy poring over data and sharing ideas about literacy at school on Thursday and Friday, and I'm really excited to take a break and share this week's books with you. Diamond Willow by Helen Frost is one of our Battle of the Books novels this year. The story, which is set in Alaska, unfolds in page-long kind of vignettes that are in different shapes, and each one has a hidden message inside. So I thought the structure was kind of contrived at first, but Frost won me over by the end of the story because of her really great characters. So that one was decent, not my favorite, but worth a read, especially if you're participating in the Battle of the Books this year. I almost didn't review this book called Spot the Plot because it struck me as kind of unremarkable, but my students absolutely loved it. The illustrations reminded me a little bit of the Alberg's illustrations in the Jolly Postman series, but the illustrator is actually the same woman who illustrated Tacky the Penguin. Now, I had never heard of this book before, but Mrs. Stock pointed me to Mrs. Byrne, who introduced me to it. I need to find my own copy of Tacky the Penguin now because I absolutely loved it. But for now, we will have to be satisfied with the fact that I copied parts of this book for our class anthology, and we are going to also add this one to our mock Caldecott list. Dust Devil is also eligible for this year's Caldecott. It's a companion novel to Swamp Angel, which I've never read, so it was interesting to be able to read this book and see if it did well on its own, which I believe is one of the criteria for being eligible for an ALA award. I really love Tall Tales, and this was a great story. You can see a giant mosquito there. But I wasn't crazy about the author's depiction of Angel, the main character. I really didn't like it, which is weird because I love the illustrator's work on Rapunzel, a book that won the Caldecott Medal several years ago. And this is by Anne Isaacs and illustrated by Paul Zielinski. Our class is beginning an author study on Steve Jenkins, and I thought that I had collected just about every Jenkins book ever written, but surprise! Many thanks are due to our library assistant, Mrs. Cole, who ordered Never Smile at a Monkey and 17 Other Important Things to Remember by Steve Jenkins. Many thanks are due to Mrs. Cole because she ordered it specifically because it was by Steve Jenkins. And now we have intermission time where Cricket reminds us that animals love books too, and she has yet to actually be quiet during a book talk. But Steve Jenkins does incredible artwork with paper art, and this one is another one of his fantastic pieces. He's kind of like, he reminds me like of Eric Carle's work, but on steroids. I mean, it's a lot more detailed than you'd ever find Eric Carle being. And apparently Cricket likes Steve Jenkins better than Eric Carle as well. But finally, I am wearing my grammar shirt showing the different uses of there, and there. Mr. Cho also owns this same shirt, but he never wears it to school because I also have it. So next time you see him, you should ask him why he never wears his there shirt, and then you should demand that he wear it right away. That's my suggestion for you. I mentioned Alan Alberg before as being an illustrator and author of The Jolly Postman, and speaking of Alberg, Alan Alberg wrote the book Everybody Was a Baby Once, which is a book of poems. Again, this was taken from the lovely new collection shelf at the Seattle Public Library. I was really surprised to see that he chose not to illustrate his own work. With children's poetry, I sometimes get into a Shel Silverstein, Jack Preletsky rut, so I appreciated the variety of poems in this collection. They're a solid mix of kind of sweet and silly poems, and I'm looking forward to adding Monster Munch to our shared reading anthology. Wayfarer by R.J. Anderson is the second book in her Fairy Rebels series. If you lived in the United Kingdom, you would actually call this book Rebel, and you'd call the first book Knife. I don't really understand why publishers thought that Wayfarer would be a better title for the book. And I also don't understand why they thought that this cover art would be better than the original cover art, which I've posted to our class website so you can kind of compare and think of which one you like better. but I digress. Although this takes place in the same realm as the first book in the series, the characters and setting are very different, and I really like when an author can do that, and Anderson held my attention throughout the entire book. She has 2 more books in the works, and they will be published in early 2011 and 2012. Those are my books for this week. I look forward to seeing you soon, and I have a lot of other books in the works for next week as well. Farewell.